Being that Brian is doing the theme of missions on Sunday evening this month, I've got just a little kind of quick video-ish thing on some of the things going on in Haiti. It's just a minute long. Part of it will be a little bit about the kids that we take care of there. Part of it will be about a particular preacher who is one of the directors at the School of Preaching that Sarah and I are affiliated with, which is not directly a work of Southwest, but that and many other things came into existence because of the orphanage that was started long ago. And through the orphanage that was there, different people came, medical groups, preaching groups, and that kind of evolved into what is known as the Haitian Christian Foundation and the preaching school. There is an eye clinic. There are several things going on in northern Haiti, and the church has been blessed in many, many ways because of what Southwest originally did, and really because of Reese Scott dragging us into this. And so this is just a little quick thing. It has some music along with it. Feel free to sing. And just a little positive news in a world that so often is trying to tell us that everything's going bad. So Bruce, if you'll run that, please.
Mes amis k'ap écoute, kouri vini accepter li. Pour ça li fait pour moi, li va faire pour tout. Ou mes amis k'ap écoute, kouri vini accepter li. Pour ça li fait pour moi, li va faire pour tout. On allait dire ça. On allait dire ça. On allait dire ça.
Good evening. Thank you, David, for that. I'm really appreciative of David's ability to have a short one or a long one, whatever we may need for a presentation about Haiti or other missions things that we're doing, something to kind of remind us of what's going on in other parts of the world that we're a part of. I want to mention this real quick before we start our sermon. Over across town, our friends at Central tonight are having a seminar on God and science that starts at 6:30. Which you will benefit from because I will probably trim the sermon just a little bit in case anybody wants to go over. And so we'll get out a little earlier than normal tonight, I hope, if I do what I think I'm going to do. So I plan to be over there. If you're interested in God and science, and I think this is something that fits what we've been talking about in evangelism and the gospel and in missions, because this is one of those struggles with the world, with the Bible, of how do they integrate the two together and how does that work? And hopefully there will be some worthwhile things to be learned over there. If you're not able to go over, they are streaming it, which I'm assuming means that it will be out there on the internet later too, so maybe you can find it in that way. All right, we'll go ahead and go to the sermon one. There we go. Tonight we're going to look at missions from another angle of what the Bible has to say about Jesus and his mission and some exceptions, I think, to that mission. In Matthew 10, verses 5 and 6, it says, the 12 Jesus sent out, instructing them, "Go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Now, this is kind of a foreign thing to us because we don't tend to operate in this way. At least I'd like to think we don't. We don't operate in the way that says, okay, this message is just for this group of people. Now, at the same time, I think because of the way minds work, and I don't think this is just us, I think this is probably churches everywhere, for the most part, when they think of filling in the pews that are empty, when they think of adding more people to our group, generally our tendency is to think of people who look like us. People that come from the backgrounds we come from, people that have the kind of history that we have, people from our part of the world, whatever it may be. And there's kind of that ethnocentricity that goes on, where we tend to think of, when I'm reaching out the gospel to someone else, it's someone that looks like me. And Jesus kind of begins things in that way, because initially this is a gospel that is to go out to the Jews, who God is trying to bring back. And the Old Testament is a story of him trying to bring them back over and over again. And so Jesus just spells it out. This is who you're to go to. But when we look at the Gospels, I think we see that although it starts with his people, there are some exceptions to this. And so we're going to look at some of those exceptions tonight. We're not going to look at all of them because I didn't think we'd have time to do it. But we're going to look at a few of those exceptions where Jesus takes his message, maybe his power of healing or something like that, to people who are not from Jewish backgrounds, and maybe what we can learn about missions as a result of that. And then, as I said last time, for the next couple weeks after, David will have a more lengthy missions report and lesson for us next week. And then we will have Lanny Tucker from EEM for us 2 weeks out. So we'll get a little more hands-on practical missions kind of stuff. So first of all, the centurion servant in Luke chapter 7, verses 2 through 10. If you want to turn there, we'll have it on the screen also. But we will look at this story. It's probably familiar to most of us. Now, a centurion had a servant who was sick and at the point of death, who was highly valued by him. When the centurion heard about Jesus, he sent to him elders of the Jews, asking him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they pleaded with him earnestly, saying, "He is worthy to have you do this for him, for he loves our nation, and he is the one who built us our synagogue." And Jesus went with them. Now, as we look at each of these stories, we're going to look at two sides of the coin that I think are probably accurate to what mission work and evangelism are like to some degree nowadays, which is to say, there are some things that are obstacles to the work that's to be done, to the mission, to the idea of evangelizing, and then conversely, there are things that we can see where the mission of God is at work, and that God wants us to be a part of that mission. So first of all, there are the obstacles of people that begin with this. First of all, there is status. There is a status difference between Jesus and this centurion. Now, in our minds, because we're here remembering Jesus today and we know he's the Son of God, it's flip-flop from what the world around them thinks the status difference is here. They feel like this centurion is someone that's very important, and Jesus is just kind of this lowly guy traveling around teaching. He's the child of a carpenter. He doesn't seem to have all of that important a way about him, and yet those who get to know him a little better begin to see there's something different. But in the world standards, the centurion is a much higher place than Jesus is. And we probably encounter some people like that. Now, for some of you, it doesn't matter who you meet. You're never intimidated by that person. You never think about the fact that they're much more important than me. But for others, that kind of thing may make you hesitate a little bit. And maybe you'd be a little unsure about saying something to them. Secondly, there's the politics of it. If we understand nothing else about the Gospels and the New Testament in general, Rome and Judaism and Rome and Christianity don't get along too well, do they? They don't see eye to eye, and Rome's basic idea when it comes to Judaism and Christianity is if we could just kind of keep them from causing too much trouble, keep all that under wraps, and it's not too much of a problem, then we'll let it go, but we don't really care for it all that much. And so there is this political divide between them. And then third, there is background. As I said, when we think of church growth, a lot of times we think of the church growing in people that are kind of like us. And sometimes that difference in backgrounds becomes a challenge. I don't know if did you guys have busing back in churches in the 60s here in Oklahoma, where they would have these big bus ministries? We had that down in Alabama, but they had bus ministries, and they would go into parts of town that churches were not in, generally speaking, and they would bring people into the church building. And what they found was a few things that came with that. One, it was exciting to have all these kids and all this energy and everything, but there was a lot of difference in culture going on, and there were challenges that came with that. And so sometimes when we run into people of a different background, we're not quite sure how to handle that. Here for me, for instance, in Ada, I have never been in an area with so many Native Americans. This is a new thing for me. Now I'm kind of accustomed now and kind of understand a little bit here and there, but I'm always learning and always have somebody that will come and tell me a story about something and how it relates to one of the tribes or one of those things. And it's interesting for me to learn because there's a lot of history there that's not necessarily my history, it's the history of another group. And so Jesus has these three things that would be viewed as challenges by those around him. Now, I say all that to say this. Again, if we look at this from a couple thousand years ago and think this is just ancient history, these are the same challenges we have now, aren't they? We have differences of status. How many of us are, because someone is from one area or another, because someone is of one social status or another, we tend to think that that's not a person that I would talk to about this. Or how many of us let the line of politics divide us from talking at all? We just don't want anything to do with those people from the other party. We don't want any of that. And so we may hesitate. Or the idea of background. If they just don't understand where I come from, I don't understand where they come from. But what we see in Jesus is he doesn't let those things challenge. He goes along with them. And when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends, saying to him, Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. Therefore I did not presume to come to you, but say the word, and let my servant be healed. For I too am a man set under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard these things, he marveled at him, and turning to the crowd that followed him, said, I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith. And when those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the servant well. So you have all these obstacles, all these reasons why it can't happen, it shouldn't happen, and then you see the mission of God unfold. And you see it unfold in a few different ways that you don't expect when you look at this story. Number one is humility. How many times in the course of a week do you think that centurion says to anyone, I am not worthy to have you come into my home? I'm going to guess this is not a normal phrase the centurion uses. He is a man, as he explains, who has authority, and he says go and people go, and he says come and they come. He is one that people listen to, respect. People probably notice when he walks into the room, and he says to Jesus, I'm not worthy for you to come into my house. This is not something that should happen. And then two, an unexpected kind of faith. It is one thing when these people who have been around the stories of God their entire lives, they've heard these things from childhood, they know what God does, they've heard about the patriarchs and all the prophets and all of these things. It's one thing for them not to be surprised by what God can do. But for this Roman, who would be an adversary of the people of God most of the time, for him to realize that all Jesus has to do is not even show up. He doesn't have to physically be there. All you have to do is say the word wherever you're at, and I know my servant will be healed. That's a pretty amazing faith, isn't it? And then third, there is healing that comes along. The mission of God is so much bigger than just spiritual things. Here he brings healing to this household, and we see that the servant is healed. Secondly, man with a demon. This is probably a familiar story again to a lot of us. Jesus is out on the lake. He calms the storm for his disciples, and they are frightened and terrified by the storm, and then frightened and terrified by the one who can calm the storm. He shows up on the other side of the lake, which is the moment where I would think as Jesus, you just want to kind of breathe a sigh of relief, maybe sit down for a bit and have a rest before the next thing that comes along. And instead, this guy approaches. Luke describes him this way. It says, when they sailed to the other side, Jesus stepped out on land. There met him a man from the city who had demons. For a long time he had worn no clothes, he had not lived in a house, but among the tombs. And so there are huge obstacles here for Jesus and for his disciples that really may not connect as much with us, but one of them being timing. Timing we get, timing we understand, and sometimes our excuse for not wanting to do something when it comes to missions or evangelism or church or ministry is, it's just not the right time. There's all these other things going on, I'm busy, I don't really have time to set aside, and so how often, those of you who seek out volunteers to do things, how often is the thing that you hear that someone doesn't have time? But realistically, do we ever really have time? I will look at my vehicles, will get to that point where they have, they need the oil change or the tire rotation or those things, and I have found that never hits at a good time. I will see that little sticker up on the windshield because I pay somebody to do it instead of doing it myself. I'll see that sticker on the windshield that reminds me it's time, and I will think, I don't want to do that today. This is not the right day for it, and I can keep putting it off and keep putting it off, but what's going to result from that is something worse. And Jesus comes into town or into this area, and he probably is not looking for this at this moment. This is not the thing that is timing out the right way. I would guarantee you the disciples are not looking for this. They've had a rough night. They've been in a storm, and then in a storm that was calm. They're trying to make sense of all of this, and they just want to have maybe just kind of a normal day. And then here comes this guy. And then the second piece of it is all the uncleanness going on. And we don't deal with this in a religious sense for sure, but we don't see this the way the Jews did, but for them, the idea that this guy is demon-possessed is strike one. We don't want to be anywhere near demons. Scott picked number 666 to start tonight, and I was a little nervous about the church service, but I always thought that's like the 13th floor in a building. They should just leave that one out. But anyhow, we don't want to be around demons either. Secondly, the tombs. They did not want to be anywhere near dead bodies, dead things. That was unclean to them. And so they would avoid that, except at certain times when it was okay to be there. And then third, the pigs. And we know that for Jewish people, pigs were unclean. And the demons, if you're not familiar with the story, and we won't read this part, but when Jesus calls the demons out of this man and changes his life forever, he sends the demons into this pig. They hurtle down the hillside and over the cliff, and there's this big to-do. You wouldn't want to be anywhere around the pigs. You wouldn't want the pigs to be a part of the story. And yet Jesus puts himself in the midst of all of this. With every excuse not to do it, he does it anyway. And we see the result of the story in verse 38 is the man from whom the demons had gone begged that he might be with him. But Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you." And he went away proclaiming throughout the whole city how much Jesus had done for him. So what is the mission of God in this instance? A new follower of Jesus. And he wants to be a literal follower of Jesus. He begs Jesus to let him follow. I feel like that's what you and I would do today. I hope if Jesus was here and we recognized it was him somehow, that we would beg, if he's going to be here on earth, that we want to follow, we want to see what's going on. But when he approaches people, generally he has to ask, doesn't he? And so often when he asks, they have reasons why they're not going to. They have other things going on, they have something more pressing, or they just don't want it because it's a difficult life. But this guy begs. And then secondly, you have a very motivated preacher here. And we will find this word again as we close everything up here in a little bit. But the word for him going out and proclaiming this to everyone is the word we use for preach. It is the word, by the way, Harding does a preaching thing for high school students every summer. It's actually the Greek word for this is the name of their preaching thing. So this guy, if you started the story, you didn't think preacher, I hope. That was what came to mind. This guy becomes a preacher. And he becomes someone who is out there and proclaiming the news of Jesus. Next, the Syrophoenician woman. And we may not know the story by this title, but it'll be familiar to us as we look. In Mark 7, verse 24, it says, "From there he arose and went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know, yet he could not be hidden. But immediately a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came down and fell at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, Syrophoenician from birth, and she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, 'Let the little children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs.' But she answered him, 'Yes, Lord, but even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs.'" So again, I think we have all these obstacles in the way. First of all, he wants to be hidden. And maybe you have been there somewhere along the way. When I was a college student, I was very much an introvert. I still am very much an introvert, believe it or not. But I was an introvert, and I used to like to go to the College Church of Christ there in Searcy and go into the balcony and sit in the back row of the balcony because I could get in and out pretty quickly and not have to mingle. And I didn't want to mingle with 2,000 people I didn't know very well. And so I wanted to kind of blend into the background. And for whatever reason, strangely enough, I never really seemed connected to the church there. I don't know why that is. So if you don't connect with people, take my advice. But he wants to be hidden. And maybe you've been there. You want to just go somewhere where people don't notice you're there. If you are someone who is recognizable, you may desire this a little more than most people. But for some people, you want to have this moment where you're not seen. And secondly, she understands. You don't refer yourself to a dog getting crumbs under the table if you don't understand the social structure. And maybe she is okay with it, or maybe she's not, but she gets this is how it works. And so even though she has pressed a little bit beyond the no that she gets initially, she still has given him an out here. Jesus, this is kind of what it is, and even the dog should get something, but I understand I'm one of the dogs. I'm just one of the ones under the table here. And so Jesus has every reason just to forget about all of this. But instead he says to her, "For this statement you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter." And she went home and found the child lying in bed and the demon gone. So the mission of God is this. She's looking for crumbs and she gets something a whole lot better than that. And isn't that still the way that God works, by the way? When we are hoping God will do something, And I know he doesn't always answer the prayer in the timing and in the way we want it. But we see God do things that are above what we can ask or imagine, don't we? We see God do things in ways that are better than the ways that we thought of in the first place. We see God in action in ways that we can't fully explain. And then secondly here, we see a child who is made whole. And that's kind of the point of the whole story, isn't it? You know, we've got this whole discussion about dogs under tables and crumbs and the whole Jew and Gentile thing going on. But the real core of all of this that the mother cares about is, my daughter needs help. My daughter needs help, and you're one that can give it. And this girl's life is changed, even though there's so many reasons why Jesus shouldn't even get involved in the first place. And then the parable of the great banquet. And this one probably too familiar to us. In Luke 14, beginning of verse 16, says that he said to him, a man once gave a great banquet and invited many. And at the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to say to those who had been invited, come, for everything now is ready. And we see the obstacles of people which begin with excuses. Everyone who is invited to this banquet, if you were to look at the parable, they all have reasons why they can't be there. Excuses, all these things going on in life. They have other plans. They have family that get in the way. And so because of all of these things, even though the banquet is there and they are honored guests at that banquet, they're just really not all that interested. There is, I believe, if I remember right, on our sign that's out here on the side of the building, somewhere on there it says something like every visitor an honored guest or something like, I'm trying to remember the exact wording of it. I love to think that everyone who drives by that sign thinks, I should go there. I would be an honored guest if I would go there. But even if they got to that part of the sign, they got past all the names and the times and the phone numbers and all that stuff, and read about visitors being honored guests, I wonder sometimes, would they have so many reasons not to? I wonder for the people that we may invite to come be a part, the people we may tell about Jesus, what are the excuses now? And unfortunately, what we have to remember about the story of the great banquet is the people with the excuses are the people who know better. It's not those outside that we assume are not going to want to come if we invite them. It's the people who know. He's talking about the Jews here. He's talking about the people who have grown up around these stories, and they know what they should do, and yet they've got reasons to just not do it. And unfortunately, we know those folks, don't we? We know people who understand the story of Jesus, who know that he died for them, who know that he rose again, and for whatever reason, they have just made more excuses to not be a part of that anymore. And so God's answer here in this parable of the great banquet is to go invite others. It says that the master said to the servant, go out to the highways and the hedges and compel people to come in, that my house may be filled. And I believe this is where we really get to the heart of the mission of God. His mission is a full house. He wants for as many people as possible to know about him. And he wants for us to be the ones who go out there and to tell them. He's not content with people not knowing the story. He is not content with people living and dying and never hearing about him. He wants for everyone to know, because the important thing here is his eternal family. That family that we may use to make an excuse of, well, I got family things going on, or I've got work things going on, or whatever it is, where we have all these reasons to not be a part of the things of God, to not go to the great banquet. God says there is an eternal family that you're to be a part of. It's your church family and the church family as a whole that is out there in the world. God has something so much better, so much greater in store for us. And he has left us with the responsibility to take that message out. Which brings us to the Great Commission. We usually look at Matthew's version of this. I'm not sure exactly why that is. I don't know if we like the wording of it better or what. But I want us to look at Mark's version of it tonight. Partly because of the context. Because I like how Mark introduces this section. In Mark chapter 16 and verse 14, it says that afterward he appeared to the 11 themselves as they were reclining at table, and he rebuked them for their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they had not believed those who saw him after he had risen. I think maybe this is why we use Matthew's version most of the time. Because we don't want to start with the negative here. We want Jesus to show up and it to be all excitement and he is risen and look at the holes in my hands and feet, and we want him flying into the sky and all of those things. And here he says, what is up with you people? I mean, people have seen and heard at this point, and you don't believe. And so the obstacles of people, one, are unbelief. Are people going to believe? And I think too often we have decided that for them. We could tell them this story and they're just not going to believe it. And that may very well be true, but not for everybody. Not for everybody. There will be those who, when you tell them the story, will say, I can't believe you think those things. There will be people who watch the God and Science thing over across town online, and they will think, this is so full of holes, I don't understand why anyone would believe this stuff. But there will be someone who will watch and someone who will hear the story that will say, never thought of it that way. And maybe there is something to this, and maybe they want to hear a little bit more. And then second, their hardness of heart. We want to make any explanation that makes more sense to us than sometimes what God is doing. And sometimes God just so desperately wants us to see what he's up to. And we're just not willing to see. And then third, and probably the hardest one for me, because I like order and I like things to be the way they need to be and all of that, it's a major change of plans for these people. I don't think it's a coincidence that he finds them reclining around a table. I don't think it's just because they're together to eat. I think they're kind of in that mode of, we don't know what to do. There are some people that saying he's back. We're not sure what to make of that. How could that even be possible? We don't know what to do with that. And their plan was, at least at some point, he's going to come in and overthrow Rome, and we're going to have a new Jewish kingdom. But even if they were to release from that a little bit, the one thing they did not plan for was, he is going to be put to death. And our leader who is there, the one who is taking us forward to do these things, now it's either up to us or it doesn't happen. And so what do we do with that? And maybe that's it for us too. Maybe our plan has always been, we will hold a gospel meeting and people will just come to it. And for years that worked for churches, didn't it? And every now and then it still does. I don't want to sell that completely short. But generally speaking, what did we see happen with the gospel meetings? People still talk about, do you remember the week-long meetings? And I will tell you, I first started going to the Churches of Christ in the mid-'80s. I do not remember the week-long meetings. And that was nearly as painful as it is to think of, almost 40 years ago. And I have no recollection at all of a week-long meeting. I've read about them in books. I've seen occasional video and pictures and things like that, but not a whole lot of video even. What I knew by the time it came to me was the Sunday through Wednesday meeting. Why? Because we've got our natural bookends already. We've got the Sunday and the Wednesday. We're already here, so let's put something in between them. And what I found in those Sunday and Wednesday meetings was there were a lot of people there on Sunday and almost as many people there on Wednesday. And on Monday and Tuesday, it's a little sparse. And then each year we would do those meetings, those numbers would be a little less, a little less, and a little less. And we struggle with the change of plan, don't we? How do we reach those people if that's not it? If we don't call in a big name to stand up here and say something and they show up on Monday and Tuesday, and what do we do? And I think the apostles were kind of in that same spot. Our leader's gone. What do we do? And so he tells them in verse 15, go into all the world and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whoever does not believe will be condemned. Is it really that simple? Just go out there and tell the story. We just sang about it. I love to tell the story. Do we really love to tell the story? Because if we did, all of us have stories we love to tell, don't we? You have that story that when you're stuck at a place where you don't want to mingle and people are telling stories, but you've got that one that you know people will laugh at or people will be just hooked on every word of it. You can't wait to find a new audience that has never heard it before so you can say it. You've all got that story. And Jesus says to us, this is that story. Because however good that one is, this one is better. And so go into all the world and tell the story. And then what did they do? They went out and preached everywhere. And by the way, preached here, the same word for what that guy in the tombs was doing when he left Jesus. Just out there proclaiming, out there preaching. They preached everywhere while the Lord worked with them and confirmed the message by accompanying signs. And so what do we see in the mission of God? One, we are to go into all the world. Now, I believe truly with all my heart that begins right here in Ada. And I hesitate a little bit to press this as much as we do because I really feel like this is a church that's pretty good at mission work. I look at what we do missions-wise, and I think this could be an example to other churches that may struggle with this. Maybe our struggle is here. And so that go into all the world, remember back to Acts 1, verse 8 that we looked at last time. It starts in Jerusalem, and then in Judea and Samaria, and then to the ends of the earth. And for us, it starts in Ada. So we go into all the world, beginning in Ada, and then into the world. And then secondly, proclaim the gospel. As David talked about in class, if you were not here this morning, This gospel does not change. We may change the way we go about talking about it. We may change our methods somehow. The Jewel Miller film strip that was a cool thing 40 years ago when we got to hear the ding and turn the little thing on the little projector, very effective. And I will tell you, if you wheel that thing into a classroom now, people, what is that? What is that thing, and how does that work? And it will be interesting for a few minutes as just a novelty of it, but the technologies have changed with that. And so we have Phil Sanders on TV, or we have a PowerPoint about Haiti. We have things that are different in how we go about doing that. But third, the really neat thing about this is what it describes happening, that God is working with them. And if you have ever felt ill-equipped to spread the gospel, that we are not talented enough, knowledgeable enough to do this, I will let you in on a little secret. We're not. I'm not. You're not. God is. And God has given us the ability that we need to do what we're going to do. The God who has told you that this is our mission and told me that this is our mission knows exactly what your abilities and talents are. The God who told us that this is our mission knows that some of us have better memories than others, some of us speak better than others, some of us know our Bibles better than others, and he says, go into the world anyway, because I am working with you. So tonight, as we think about the gospel, I believe it is something that truly can still change the world. And I know that deep down we do. But I worry sometimes, as we looked at James over the last several months on Sunday mornings, sometimes our actions don't match up with what we believe. Because our belief that the gospel can change the world has to be combined with an action that shows that. And so this is the story that we must tell, and this is a story as a church that we must support to go all around the world. And sometimes that's us going ourselves, sometimes that's us doing everything we can to make sure that others can go, but the message of Jesus must make it to the entire world, because God desires a full house. Tonight, if you have never followed him, God desires for you to be a part of that mission. He desires for you to be one that hears his story, whose life has changed every bit as much as the demon-possessed man in the tomb or someone that was near death and healed. He expects your life to be changed in such a way that you can tell others about what he has done for you. Or if you have been there, but you have allowed yourself in excuses and other things to get in the way, he wants to bring you back to him as he did for his own people. As we looked at the very beginning of this, he wanted his people from the Old Testament days to come back to him. He wants you back too. If there's something we can do for you in your spiritual walk, some way we can pray for you or help you, please come while we stand and sing.